Well, folks, you might have seen this coming. Donald Trump, amid his suppression of free speech and demonization of political critics, just hurled a major bomb at the New York Times. But don't count on this bomb going off, and it does have real potential to backfire on the taco president. I'm David Reddish. Welcome to Occupy Democrats. On Monday, the New York Times ran a story concerning a recent deal between the Trump administration and the nation of United Arab Emirates. Earlier this year, the Trump White House brokered a deal to give the UAE some cutting-edge microchips, while the UAE made a $2 billion investment in a Trump-owned company. Here, let's let Anderson Cooper break it down.
Tonight we're learning about two multi-billion-dollar deals involving the Trump White House, the ruling family of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and World Liberty Financial, a cryptocurrency business co-founded by the Trump family and the family of Steve Witkoff, a close confidant of the president who's also his Mideast envoy. The New York Times reports that in one deal, an Emirati investment firm deposited $2 billion in World Liberty Financial. Shortly after, the administration granted the UAE access to advanced AI chips. Now, the Times says, quote, while there's no evidence that one deal was explicitly offered in return for the other, the confluence of the two agreements in itself is extraordinary. Taken together, they blurred the lines between personal and government business and raised questions about whether U.S. interests were served. Eric Lipton is a Times investigative reporter. He joins us now. It's an extraordinary investigation here. What possible reason would the UAE government have to use this Trump-Witkoff-linked cryptocurrency in a $2 billion transaction other than to curry favor with the president while doing this other deal?
We asked the same question of the G42 and MGX, which is the UAE-backed sovereign wealth fund, financed organization, why they picked World Liberty Financial. And they said, well, we just looked at the available cryptocurrency companies and this seemed like the right fit. But what they didn't mention is that, MGX, the company that gave the $2 billion, one of their board members is Marty Edelman, who's been a longtime friend of Steve Witkoff's and was a real estate lawyer that worked with him on some transactions in New York City. And that this deal was going to bring enormous profits to Steve Witkoff and to President Trump, at the same time as the United Arab Emirates was looking for access to these AI chips, one of the most important inventions in human history. They want to turn themselves into a world center of data and artificial intelligence. They want to transform themselves from an oil-based economy to a data and artificial intelligence-based economy, and they needed access to these chips.
Scary, right? The UAE giving our most cutting-edge chips to China, and all they had to do was buy off Donald Trump and Steve Witkoff. President Taco is a cheap date, to say the least. Here's hoping they also didn't ask him to bend over. Use your imagination. Moving on. Emboldened to attack free speech following the death of right-wing gadfly Charlie Kirk, Trump has decided to declare war on the New York Times. Amazing how these people decry so-called cancel culture and defriend free speech, unless, of course, it is something they don't like, in which case they go out of their way to destroy lives. For further evidence of that phenomena, see our other videos here on the channel. Back to the matter at hand. With all this in mind, Trump announced this morning that he would sue the New York Times for defamation for a whopping $15 billion. Posting to Truth Social, Trump announced the lawsuit. Today, I have the great honor of bringing a $15 billion defamation and libel lawsuit against the New York Times, one of the worst and most degenerate newspapers in the history of our country, becoming a virtual mouthpiece for the radical left Democrat Party. I view it as the single largest illegal campaign contribution ever. Their endorsement of Kamala Harris was actually put dead center on the front page of the New York Times, something heretofore unheard of. The Times is engaged in a decades-long method of lying about your favorite president, me, my family, business, the America First movement, MAGA, and our nation as a whole. I am proud to hold this once-respected rag responsible, as we are doing with the fake news networks such as our successful litigation against George Stephanopoulos, ABC Disney, and 60 Minutes CBS Paramount, who knew that they were falsely smearing me through a highly sophisticated system of document and visual alteration, which was, in effect, a malicious form of defamation and thus settled for record amounts. They practice this long-term intent and pattern of abuse, which is both unacceptable and illegal. The New York Times has been allowed to freely lie, smear, and defame me for far too long, and that stops now. The suit is being brought in the great state of Florida. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. So, first of all, can we talk about how confused that post is? Is he filing suit because the Times endorsed Kamala Harris, as any sane person would have done? Because did you notice what isn't mentioned there? The actual story he's filing suit over. Seems like an odd arrangement of priorities, doesn't it? He also tipped his hand in referencing his settlements with ABC and CBS, two of the dumbest decisions in broadcast history, in which they essentially paid Trump to leave them alone. What's interesting here is that the amount he wants from the Times is much greater, and it doesn't look like the Times will be the easy pushover that the two TV networks were. This morning, the New York Times responded to the lawsuit in a statement of its own. The New York Times declared, quote, "The lawsuit has no merit, it lacks any legitimate legal claims, and instead is an attempt to stifle and discourage independent reporting. The New York Times will not be deterred by intimidation tactics. We will continue to pursue the facts without fear or favor and stand up for journalists' First Amendment right to ask questions on behalf of the American people," closed quote. The suit itself also names journalists Suzanne Craig, Russ Butner, Peter Baker, and Michael S. Schmidt by name, as well as Penguin Random House, which published a book about Trump titled Lucky Loser, penned by Craig and Butner. Given the size of the suit and the reputation of the Times, don't expect them to settle either. And that could ultimately spell doom for Donald Trump. Discovery in a case like this would be massive and would almost certainly involve depositions of Trump and other key campaign and White House officials, which opens the door to perjury charges, should they have a memory slip. And since Trump has all the cognitive retention of a slip and slide at this point, with just as many grass clippings, mind you, he looks like he's setting himself up for failure. We'll keep you updated on this story as it continues to develop. This is Occupy Democrats.